this panel is essentially a very high-level panel that is going to be shaping the discussions that are going to be taking place in the next 2 days. Essentially, they're going to be looking at the shifting patterns in the world in the past year, and also give us some of their reflections as to what are they thinking will be happening in the next year. We have former Minister of Defense of Austria, Werner Fasslabend. He is going to be dealing with essentially the tensions between the United States of America and China, Putin there, Russia, and what is the impact of that tension to the rest of us in the global south. And my sister Abla Abdel Latif, the Executive Director of Research in the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies in Egypt, will also be dealing with the same topic, but focusing on the interconnections and the impact of some of the crises of that global shift in some of the crises that the world is facing today, using the example of Palestine and Sudan. Minister Anand Sharma, we take advantage of the fact that he's a former Minister of Trade and Industry. He will take us through the impact of these shifting patterns in respect of the rules-based international order, or rather international disorder, looking at the World Trade Organization as an example in the past 7 months, past 7 years, and past 30 years. And in the end, it's my brother here, Nelson Mufu. He came in here to protect a particular program, which is very important for all of us, which is the key program of the United Nations, the Strategic Development Goals. Because as all of these things are happening, I suspect, Samir, there's a real possibility that those strategic development goals are being ignored. So that's my panel, and they will make the first reflections, and I'm not going to be interrogating them. I'm going to be giving people in the room, because people in the room are the experts. People in the room know why they are here, an opportunity to engage with them. But let's start with you, Werner.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your invitation. You and also Samir Saran. It's a pleasure to be here, and I feel very familiar, although it's the first time I'm here in South Africa, because my son's name is Max. And insofar, it really sounds very familiar. We had already an almost perfect outlining from you, Max, and also from Samir about the big changes. I will try to concentrate on a few changes, not all of them, but especially the geostrategic ones. Of course, we are confronted with major changes if we look at technology, at our environment. Maybe in a few years, the most important word will be water. We are not prepared for it. But I will try also to go back a little bit in our past and look forward what could happen, what will happen in the coming years. When I say I want to go back in the past, let's just ask ourselves, what was the situation 2,000, 3,000 years ago? What was the center of the world? The world did exist just in a similar way as now. But of course, there were quite cultural and political differences. And if you look back, you have to say that probably in the ancient period, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, it was the Mediterranean area that used to be the center, the geopolitical center of the world. Not only for Europe, but also for Africa, Northern Africa, and Western Asia. And everything that happened in cultural development, technological development, came from the Egyptians, from the Phoenicians, from the Greeks, the Romans, from the, the Genoese, and the Venetians, and so on. And this lasted around about until 1500. What was the change? The big change was the discovery of America. And suddenly it was not the Mediterranean countries that had more or less the lead in the global development, but it suddenly was the Portuguese and the Spaniards, the French and the British, the Dutch and the Belgians, the Germans, and so on. And more or less, they made the world for around about 500 years. You know, when I entered school, you have to be aware that there were only 3 really independent countries in the whole continent of Africa. Not so long ago. But now we are more or less living in a period where also this period has come to an end. With the beginning of the 21st century, we are now in not an Atlantic period anymore, of course not Mediterranean, but in the Indo-Pacific area. Indo-Pacific area and the Indo-Pacific space, there are different definitions. This means that the hub of the world, the center of global gravity, changed from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific. And this area comprises more or less the whole coast, the whole maritime coast of the Asian continent and also of the Eastern African side. It goes down the west to Australia and more or less is in between, let me say, the Atlantic Ocean on the one hand and the Eastern Pacific at the other hand. What was the reason for this? The reason for this was, of course, not just one specific motivation or whatever, but it used to be the sum out of few developments. At the one hand, it certainly was the phenomenal rise of China. Nobody expected that it would be possible within a few years, a few decades, you know, to go from zero-sum up to the very top of the world. But it also was not only China, but the whole Eastern and Southeastern Asian region. And then we had this demographic development. You know, when I started school, it also was quite interesting. Europe at this time had around about 3 times as many inhabitants as the whole African continent. Europe had around about double the population of India, not quite double of China. Now this is completely different. Of course, Africa has around about double the population of Europe, and also China and India do have more or less double of it. So far, things have changed quite a bit. And you have to be aware, it's not only this kind of demographic change, but of course also economic change. In the same period, we had, you know, this enormous rise of the Gulf states, who became the investors. And now we have a picture where you could say China is the production line of the world, India has become the service center of the world, and the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, have become the investors of the world. But still, of course, there are some others, like the Americans, that still are more or less to have the function of the bank of the world and also to be the garrison of the world because they have the military power. And there's also Russia that has quite some military power still, also otherwise. Of course, there also was quite some decline. And one of the reasons is also that, of course, Russia has really a vast territory, but only a little bit more than 140 million inhabitants. And of course, it's not so easy with, if you don't have the human sources, really to govern the world. And insofar, if we look at the situation now, of course, America is still number one. China is number two, competing very much. There is Russia still at the military side, but not a real factor against America or China. We have India, maybe a country that has the best potential for the future if it can live up with its development to the standards it is looking to. And we still have Europe, European Union, with almost 500 million people of inhabitants, very high level and also economic strength, but with a big handicap also. Out of this group of countries, it's the only one that is not a national state, but just a union, and therefore does not have a common foreign, a common security, or common defense policy. And insofar, the situation has changed quite a bit. And now we are in the situation that not only this pattern, the geostrategic situation has changed quite a bit, but also we are confronted with developments in politics that are quite different to what we have learned from the beginning. Suddenly, we have an American president who does not care about democracy, about free markets, or a rule-based order. We do have a Chinese president who just loses his foreign minister or his defense minister or a dozen of generals within a week. No question about it. We do have a Russian president who is fighting against his immediate neighbor and so on. And we are obviously on the way, you know, from a rule-based order to a new imperial age where the strength is the decisive factor, if we allow it. And this will be the big question. This will be the big question. And what I can say from my own experience now, of course, this situation has surprised us in many respects. But at the other hand, you can see, you know, Europe is going to make its independent way from the Americans. Not completely, but a big, big step just by its experiences since Donald Trump overtook the presidency. We also can see, you know, that, okay, not only India is setting new initiatives, but also other countries out of the G20, as you mentioned already, you know, whether this is Brazil or South Africa and others. And insofar, the world is not shaped completely up to now. And we will be responsible whether we will have a rule-based order in the future. And this is the most important thing. Having round about 200 states all over the world with different situations in every respect, we cannot trust that one country or two countries or maybe three countries will make the business and all the others have to follow. Of course, we will have to look what is going on. We will have to respect their strength. But at the other hand, a rule-based order is in the interest of the whole world. And if you look to the challenges we do have with our environment, if you look to the fact that just, the fight, this infight between America and China does not go into more globalization, but it is sort of a deglobalization. Why? Because everybody tries, to bring his allies and his friends behind himself. And this cannot be the consequence. We want something where people in Europe can also trust on the development in Africa and Africans in India or in Southeast Asia or in South America. And therefore, of course, we will have not to overtake just developments as they are presented at the moment, but as you can see in many respects, we will be able to shape the world, to shape a rule-based order with open markets and also with governments that have to have the trust of their people. This is what we need for the future. And therefore, even if we are confronted with such big changes, we will have it in our hands to make the right changes. The world and the development of the globe has not finished yet, and it will be our challenge to do so.
That was exactly 12 minutes. Thank you very much, Werner. We are at an age of an imperial age where strength is the decisive factor. Europe is getting independent from the United States. Rule-based order is the future. But interestingly, Africa has disappeared in this map. Abla.
Hi. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, Samir, for inviting me. It's always great to come to the Cape Town conversations. Before I talk specifically about Africa and about Palestine, let me comment on something that Samir said. The fact that there isn't much talk about the principles, there is no principles conversation. I think this is very critical because if we are after a new rules-based order, it has to be based on the right principles. If the right principles are not there, then we are going to be in the same vicious circle of very bad performance. When I looked at the questions for this session and looking at 2026 and what's going to happen and et cetera, and I kept on thinking back, taking stock of what happened in 2025, an old movie came to my mind, the title of which was always very interesting to me, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I'm sure you all remember that, okay? It's extremely interesting and extremely relevant, okay? So looking very generally at what's happening, okay? The bad things that the multilateral system is collapsing. The ugly thing is that it's all happening because of one country, a huge country, but it's one country. And the good thing is that it got the Global South together, okay, in seeing that they can actually make a difference and take things forward. And depending on the interaction between the good and the bad and the ugly, this is going to determine what's going to happen in 2026, okay? Of course, the fact that G20 is going to be in the US doesn't say very nice things about that, but hopefully we learned a lesson during the last 4 years to try and make a difference. I had to start by saying those things, if you allow me. All right, can we apply the rule of the good, the bad, and the ugly on the Palestinian situation and on the African situation? Yes. Okay, let me start with Palestine. Okay, and let me start with the ugly, which is extremely obvious to everyone. The humanitarian cost that took place, the disasters, everything that happened there. Okay, but the bad, okay, is also in the effect of all this on the economies of the entire world, the economies of the region, the effect on the Red Sea, the risk in the shipments, the cost that the entire world paid, the transaction cost, the extra expenses in order to avoid the region, etc., etc. But then also the bad is how we are trying to handle things now. The Palestinian situation is being looked at suddenly as if it's only about the reconstruction of Gaza. Palestine has been reduced to Gaza. Okay, that's it. Very small, and let's reconstruct it. And this is becoming the focus as if this is going to be the solution. The day after is about rebuilding Gaza. Okay, the day after is ignoring completely the core problem, which is the Palestinian. This is where the principles come in, the right of the Palestinians to the land. And unless this is recognized, you are never going to have proper security in the region. Okay? And if you don't have security in the region, then everybody is going to suffer, not only this region, but the entire world, because the economic cost is very, very high. You can take this further and look at things like IMEC and the new corridors that emerged. The whole idea behind those corridors emerged because of the security situation in the region. So what you are doing is creating other connections, other corridors to try and avoid the problems in the region. And you are throwing a lot of money, a lot of resources in an infrastructure that might not be used at all if security is regained, because the cheapest route is the Suez Canal, okay? And if we have all those other connectivity roads, okay, they are not being efficient enough, okay, because the reason they exist is because of a political thing, not an economic thing, even though the whole thing is a business situation, okay? So this is just to say that everything is interconnected, and the bad is coming in even the way we are handling things now. Now, is there anything good in this? Yes, there is something good, despite all the horror, okay? The awareness that what is happening in this region is not just a fight between Israel and Hamas, okay? It's actually a lot more than that. Israel is being recognized by the world, okay, as being of high danger on the sovereignty of the entire region. Another thing that emerged, but it's not seen by many people, the Gulf countries have always been looked at as being isolated islands of stability that have nothing to do with the mess that's happening in the region. But what happened proved that they are also not intact. And from the depth of that crisis, this brought about a level of solidarity and need to look at their security and at their economic situation on their own and not only rely on the outside. You see this happening with Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi to a large extent. So this recognition, okay, is an end of the old narrative and hopefully a new one where these countries collaborate better. Now, how much of this is going to actually happen? Again, how strong the good is versus the bad versus the ugly. On Sudan, Sudan is a very, very, very sad case. And the ugliest part about it is that it's ignored by the world. It's not being looked at all. Okay? Millions and millions of people in Sudan are being displaced. It's a horrible war that is being described incorrectly as being a domestic war, okay, between the army and those rapid forces, when actually it's a regional problem, it's regional instability. There is a lot of interference by external forces, external countries, okay, and the situation is not resolved, and all the bad policies, again, is being looked at as if it's a domestic situation, okay. Is there something good about it? Okay. Again, can you get anything that's good here? What's happening in Sudan is a model for the exploitation of Africa that is actually taking place, has taken place forever, and is continuing to take place. Okay. the exploitation and the rivalries between countries as they interfere in Africa, going after their own interest. Okay, so hopefully Africa is going to wake up. I hope that Africa wakes up and watches and sees the level of exploitation for its resources that's taking place. All the talks about connectivity and about new corridors that are being talked about, they're all after, okay, the extraction of the minerals in Africa. And the African Union, even though it does have a place in the G20, this place is nothing but a voice, but it's not a terribly effective one yet, and will not be so unless there is a secretariat that represents the entire continent, not only the president of the AU being a representative, and when he's changed, all the topics that are being discussed are also changed. So the AU needs to be a powerful player in the G20 if anything is going to happen. And what's happening in Sudan, okay, is an example for how when Africa is not united and tries to pull its forces together, okay, it will be the field for rivalries and fights between different countries and exploitation. One of the strongest statements that I heard in Cairo Forum, which is a conference I had in Cairo recently, was by actually an African brother, and he said, the world right now is in a feast. There is a huge table, everybody has a seat, and Africa is the menu, okay? So hopefully Africa is not going to be the menu. Thank you.
Just before we pass that, in your analogies of the good, the bad, and the ugly, the 17th of November resolution 2803 on Gaza to implement Trump's peace plan, where do you locate
Well,
that
Trump is a
resolution?
problem. Trump is the problem. Trump's support for Israel is the problem. Again, it's very easy to see the rhetoric in the whole thing. Trump's plan is to have a Riviera in Gaza, not to have Gaza of the people or Palestine of the people. And so any move in the right direction of having peace is good, but I don't see, okay, at all, until now, a recognition of Palestine as a country, okay, as it should be. You cannot even be talking about reconstruction of Palestine when you do not have a proper Palestinian state. They're going to live there. So how is it going to look like? So Trump's plan is simply supporting what Israel is continuing to do and will continue to be the case until the Arabs get together, okay, and understand that their interests and their safety is in their own hands. And they cannot wait and should not wait for outsiders to do it. And that includes the Gulf countries.
So
that's part of the
13 members of that were sitting in the Security Council that didn't oppose this Trump plan, have they become a problem?
No, and then opposing the plan, but doing what? Okay, you can't just oppose the plan. You need to have another suggestion. You need to encourage the Palestine to have its own voice. They have to choose who is to lead them, etc., etc., etc. I think all the solutions will need to come from the global South, wherever, in each and every area, it has to come from them. And unless they put themselves together, okay, and raise their voice and have solutions and have practical solutions on the ground, nothing is going to happen. It's going to be only rhetoric. Africa is always talking about getting together and not being exploited and respecting the rights of their youth, etc. But they're not doing anything about it, and they're not united, and that's the problem. Okay,
Thanks.
all of this is on the ugly side.
Minister, from the Gaza as the graveyard of international law, we are sitting with the possibility of WTO being a graveyard of international trade rules.
At the outset, I would like to thank the Thabo Mbeki Foundation and the ORF for convening this year's conversations soon after a very important summit of G20 countries in Johannesburg.
is not a question merely of the WTO as an organization. In my mind, and a view shared by many, we are looking at what we had gained, the efforts that were made, institutions that were built in the last 78 years when it comes to creating a global architecture which had sovereign equality, justice, and democracy as the foundational principles. What we are seeing today is the unraveling, a very sustained systemic assault coming from the preeminent military and economic power. You use the word or expression, new imperialism. Well, when we look at what has happened since the World War II, those powers which were victors, responsible for anchoring a new global architecture, which in any case was asymmetrical, unequal, and less than fair, if not unfair, especially to the countries of the global south, or the developing countries, or the countries which were for long subjugated, exploited, robbed of their resources, where people were brutally suppressed, and the emergence of these countries after the World War as sovereign, independent nations. It's interesting and ironic that what has happened in the last 8 months is undoing or dismantling the gains of almost 8 decades. WTO is not just an organization. It was meant to be an integral part of a rule-based order. Why? Because the countries of the North, the countries which are still a club of G7, or the countries which were colonizing powers, were forced by the voices of the people of Asia, Africa, Latin America to create new rules for access to markets, sharing of resources, sharing of technologies. Let's not forget that what we are witnessing today, coming out of America, is blatant illegality. Why I say so? First, the GATT, General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, 1947. Both GATT 1 and GATT 2. 8 rounds of world's negotiations, as President Mbeki would recall. The Uruguay round concluding it. 30 years exactly after the WTO was established. At least creating an institution which provided a fair opportunity or platform to the countries which we now say, and rightly so, as the global south. Not only to fight for fairness, but also a dispute redressal mechanism. The fundamental rules were A, the most favored nation status, which is part of GATT, part of WTO, and non-discrimination. President Trump has violated both. A, the commitments of America when it comes to the bound rates. People must understand what are the bound rates and the applied rates, which were agreed to. no country, to my best of my understanding, though we demand it, have stuck to the bound rates. My country may have agreed to bound rates of certain commodities, maybe 85%, 90%, but to the applied rates, maybe 10%. That's the reality of the world. Pre-Trump decisions, or American decisions, the average MFN rates for trade were 8%. Now they are 15.8%. At the same time, we have to remember that in the period that we are referring to, the global trade has grown almost 43, 44 times, and in value, close to 300 times. That is the reality. So the trade today would be roughly 33, 34 trillion, but the two countries have 1/3 between America and China. Close, almost 1/3. Together, they have 11 trillion. The countries which constitute, in fact, a vast majority of nations at the United Nations, more than 4/5 majority, have lesser share, but an important role to play when it comes to global resources. So the challenge that we face is an unprecedented disruption. The question is, I was listening carefully to our esteemed panelists, colleagues, Minister Varna and Apla. It would be a mistake which we'll be making as countries of the world, as sovereign nations, to think that there is a dominant sovereign nation which undermines and insults the sovereignty of other nations. That will not happen. Second, on unipolarity. This was said also in 1990s, after the end of Cold War, the fall of Berlin Wall. Many of us said that it is a transient phase of unipolarity. The world got carried away. Much was said. The end of the world. You remember? But the world as such is multipolar, interconnected, interdependent. There are continents which may be poor because we have a disproportionate share or burden of poverty. Whether it's sub-Saharan Africa or countries of South Asia, 50% of those who are living in extreme hunger and poverty come from these regions of the world. But when it comes to resources and the contribution, historically, the resources have come from where? Africa, Latin America, Asia. So can the world be, you have a disruption which is unprincipled, as I've said, and the actions that are being taken today, less commented upon, is not only the WTO, it's the entire multilateral architecture, which would include the Bretton Woods institutions. We have been fighting our countries that what is this P5 and what is the veto power? Can there be decisions made about all of us, particularly countries of Africa, 54 countries, countries like Brazil, India, without us? So we do not have any organization today which can be called representative. It's not only trade. No organization, I'm talking of United Nations, sadly, which can take decisions, pass resolutions, which are thrown in the dustbin. Are we forgetting what we have seen in the last 2 years? Our sister here was referring about Palestine. Question is, on these issues, many of us, belong to a generation which came out of activism. We saw struggles. The voices were different. Today, the question which comes to my mind, has the world lost its conscience, its soul? That what were the gains? As we are talking here, the last 4 summits of G20 on the trot. G20 did not emerge from a vacuum. Nobody can say stay away from it or belittle it. It emerged out of compulsion after the Asian economic crisis, and as Samir said, the global financial crisis of 2008, where the countries of the global south enormously contributed to stabilizing of the world, and we rebounded quickly. So it's not a question of the will. So I'll only say that any new order, first of all, we must try to fight, to preserve. Because after the South African G20 presidency, Indonesia, India, Brazil, and now South Africa, it will be moving to the other extreme of global north. We know, I have no hesitation to say, why South Africa as a country was targeted, or African continent, but South Africa as the host. Why a country which is most powerful, which has bigger responsibility to honor, uphold, and defend the world order, allowed to dismantle? And the question is not a riddle. It's the sheer arrogance. And my response would be, in an interconnected, interdependent world, it would be a delusion for any country, irrespective of their military or economic might, or one region, to remain secure, stable, and become more affluent at the cost of the others, especially the global south. We have to think in terms of one world for solutions. So as I agree with what Samir said, conversations based on principles and a world which can sustain and survive and not see more suffering, more killing, more poverty, but the sharing of resources, sharing of technologies, transfer of technologies, especially by those who have been, without any doubt, guilty of historical injustices.
I just want you to end there so that
Sure.
you don't cover everything that they might want to ask. Um, Nelson, whilst we're looking at the world described in the fashion that they are describing, us in the global south and in Africa in particular, we're still waiting for the end of poverty, for the end of hunger, for clean water, for energy. These wars, these conflicts, this bullying seems to be taking us very far away from that. But I just want, because I saw you on television celebrating this weekend of celebrating the consensus document that came. Hasn't these regional meetings and structures, including the G20, not have been developed into side shows that avoids the reality of designing a proper program to achieve the objectives of the SDGs?
Wow, no, thanks for that. And it's been fascinating listening to the panel, but let me really just acknowledge you, my brother Max, and also Samir for inviting me, and also acknowledge, of course, the elder statesman in the room for his steadfast leadership as well. To respond directly to your question, but then tying the knots with what we've been hearing, I think the question we're facing is not that there is an impact in the global fragmentation and what is happening. It is how we prevent that from being the story. Because I heard Samir talked about we need to shape a new world order, but I think the fight right now is about safeguarding what we currently have as agreed norms, principles, and agreements, including the Sustainable Development Goals and the Climate Agreement and other international agreements that we have in place. Because things that we took for granted over the last 8 years, and we're celebrating 80 years of the United Nations and its existence as well as the Charter, things that we've taken for granted, the Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the agreements we had in Beijing, then the SDGs themselves, they're being rolled back. And there is a reason for that. And you asked the question about me celebrating consensus. It's because it was high time that I think the world comes together and reaffirms principles. It was not new agreements that the G20 came to. It was agreed language that they preserved. And even around agreed language, there was arguments around that. So I think just we're in this dystopian world where we're celebrating the fact that we are reaffirming what we had agreed already. And I think that's number one we need to look at. But it is a reality we're facing. And world leaders coming together, I think, over the weekend in Johannesburg, despite the pressures, despite the challenges, managed to still say we believe in working together to solve global challenges. And I think the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are really an encapsulation of the global problems we're facing, right? But then, like we also heard, words do not lead to action. Commitments do not lead to the change we need to see if we're not intentionally working on them. Famous quotes, words do not cool down the planet and will not give us jobs, food, or rights. So it's really about working on it now together. And I think, for me, that's the challenge. And just some few facts. With regards to the Sustainable Development Goals, a global stock take was taken this year by the Secretary General. And sadly, we're off track between now and 2030. And essentially because of what we've heard. The geopolitical fragmentation, the pressures, the trade wars, the conflicts, the pandemic that happened as well. And so we're only 35% of the targets that can be measured that are being achieved so far. About half of the targets, about 50%, making very slow marginal progress. And we have 18% of targets regressing. So that tells you we're not in a good place. And it's essentially because of what we've heard about right now. And I think we need to refocus on, at the country level, national and subnational level, regional and continental levels, and global, be working on how we address issues of persisting inequalities, rising unemployment, particularly amongst young people, warring poverty that persists essentially in a number of the global south, and also interestingly in upper middle income countries like South Africa and others as well. So that, I think, is the battle that has to be drawing our attention. And there are sideshows, there are distractions, there are attempts to derail us, but I think we need to not let that stand in the way to achieve the progress that we really must achieve for people and planet. And for me, that I think is the real focus going forward. Yes, we need to reform the UN. We need to make it fit for purpose. And that goes for the entire UN system, not only the Security Council. Also, you mentioned, Minister, the Bretton Woods institutions and the other architectures that is out there that needs to be reformed. We need to remind ourselves as well that as we seek to safeguard the norms, the principles, the charter, that's the principles that should guide what we do going into the future. But multilateral cooperation that we currently also are trying to safeguard, we shouldn't forget was shaped 80 years ago when half of the world was still under colonization. So they did not have a seat at the table. They were worse than being on the menu at the time even. And I think now we need to make a fit for purpose, updated multilateral world order that really reflects the realities of today. And I'll end by saying, when we look at what I think my sister mentioned about Africa, I think it's last year or 2 years ago, the Thabo Mbeki annual lecture, Africa Day lecture, was about the new scramble for Africa. And we're witnessing that around essentially these critical minerals and the reshaping of Africa and bilateral deals that really do not reflect the African consensus around integration, around having a continental free trade area, and around working better together to have a voice and a global impact. And I think we need to really revisit that as well, because ultimately it's not the rest of the world that will come and help Africa develop. It is our responsibility as Africans to take that charge forward and organize ourselves better and withstand whatever pressures that may be out there. So I think for us to be able to address, Max, and let me close by going back to where you started, basic issues of food on the table, jobs for people, tackling poverty, we need to, as Africans and African countries, focus on those issues, use our resources better, work better with each other, and then go into the world with bigger impact. Thank you.
Those hands are a bit cold for this wonderful team. Can we do that again? No, but thank you very much. Colleagues, this is a feast prepared for all of you. So you are invited to join in it. Sunaina, the program director, has done something. She has switched off the watches. So we have no time measures because the clock is off. I'm not sure how long we're going to take, but I'm going to take first 5 questions, short comments, no speeches.
Thank you, Max, for a wonderful thing. I'm Pranjal Sharma from India. I am also a non-resident fellow with ORF for Middle East. You know, in the whole fog of wars, the trade wars and the real wars, we've forgotten something very basic, the industrial collapse of Europe. For the first time in 30 years, car making in Germany is at the lowest point. Europe-Africa relationship is actually at the core of what we are trying to talk about. Europe likes to build dependencies. For example, Africa still buys 35 billion, 40 billion worth of food from Europe, which is criminal if you ask me. So in a time when the industrial collapse of Europe is taking place, there is dependencies on food of Africa. There's CFA franc, which is controlling the monetary union of more than 14 countries. How do we rebuild? I believe that the collapse of Europe is an opportunity for Global South, especially Africa. Can we build on that? Without Europe becoming weak, I don't think Africa can rise, because that's a core relationship that we tend to ignore when we look at all other key players in the world. Thank you.
Just for good order, if you need to ask questions, just stand on a queue next to the mic. We'll go to that side.
Thank you very much. I have a short comment. It was said that we need to shape our world.
Who are you?
Václav Lukovic. I come from Europe. I have a Polish and German. I am in the medical industry. And I have to say, as it was said, we need to shape the world order. I would like to address Werner Fassleben, who said that the world was European, it was Mediterranean. I think it is a little bit ironic as we stand here in Africa, as we talk about the global south, as we talk about the G20, and actually the world wasn't European. We need to leave this paradigm that is Eurocentric if we want to shape the future. 2,000 years ago, we had the Sun dynasty, we had the Han dynasty, we had a lot of Indian dynasties, which unfortunately I cannot pronounce, but I know they were very sophisticated. We had Mayan dynasties, we had the Ghana dynasty. So please, I think part of the problem is that we were too Eurocentric. And while we shouldn't look back, we must look forward, but let us get away from this Eurocentric approach, because in many cases it's wrong. Thank you.
Werner, I suggest you don't contest that. This is cradle of humanity.
Hi, my name is Dominic. I'm from Ivory Coast. I would like first to thank the panelists and particularly Sami and ORF for bringing us together, and for Excellency Thabo Mbeki, special thanks, because I remember I was that young, in my 20s. But I would like to thank you for your efforts for the peace in Ivory Coast around 2010. Thanks for that. I have a question and a point of view that I would like to share with you guys. The question is, and let me go straight to the point, it's about the purpose, as Sami said. We are investing in nuclear weapon and all those things that are made and built to kill and destroy. I would like to ask, what is the real purpose of doing this? Because I really doubt any country in this world will wake up a morning and decide to throw a nuclear bomb into another country. I really doubt, unless we can discuss that. I have no problem. And then the point that I would like to mention is, when I look at my Africa and what is happening at the moment, I again think that we are doing the wrong fight, because we are trying to protect what we do not have. We are protecting barriers that we even never draw. It's been drawn not with our contribution. Secondly, we are protecting our economy. We do not have any structured economy. I think we should definitely be open, more inclusive, share knowledge, share experience. And to finish, I would like to take the example of the BRICS, because yes, we talk about United Nations, that's a very large group. We break it down to African Union. What is the support of this organization to African countries when there is a real problem in a certain country? If I go down to the BRICS, which is a smaller group, but in diverse continent, how it is for a student in Egypt to have access to opportunities in Brazil, for example. How it is for Russia, for Russians, to move to China. I mean, how do we collaborate even within those small groups that we are creating? Is it not just for fun, or they exist for a real purpose? And if yes, I would like to hear about this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Masanori.
Thank you. Thank you for wonderful talks. My name is Masanori Kobayashi from the Saseko Peace Foundation in Japan. I just wanted to follow up to the remarks made by Mr. Sharma that the world lost conscience. I think this is one of the really powerful message, and we saw that we believed in people's conscience to build equitable, prosperous world. But people easily use pandemic and the climate change as an easy excuse for our failure. Why did we fail to live up to the people's expectations, and why did we lose conscience? Why did we lose the people believing in conscience to work together to build the world that we would like to have? And I just wanted to get a little more elaboration from you. I came back from Brazil attending climate change talks. We saw another big backlash, G20 meeting taking place here without an important player. Who do we have to believe to build a collective conscience that we really need to build the world we would like to have? Thank you.
Thanks. I think, can we take this round of questions? I'm not sure if you want to take it like an auction, or you want me to distribute the questions. You want an auction? Okay, you can start.
I mean, I can start just because I was holding the mic. And just a general reflection as well. We're meeting now when EU, Africa heads of states are gathering in Luanda and also meeting to talk about partnerships. And to the point about codependencies, I think that really needs to be something we take seriously. What types of partnerships are we entering into going forward? Ones that respect each other and are mutually beneficial, or one that is exploitative and really persists. There's this notion of one part of the world is there to provide for the other. And I think that's something that really needs to happen. And I go again to the point I made earlier about the fact that it is our responsibility and the responsibility of leaders of the global south to come to the table being clear about what is it that they want to take out of these conversations. And so it's not for someone else to rebalance the notion of a Eurocentric world. It's for us to be able to address that as well. But the main point I wanted to address was one around the cost of spending on wars and militarization versus that of spending on development. And in a recent UN report, it shows that if current trends persist, we are probably going to have about $6.6 trillion being spent a year by 2035 on the military, when the gap to finance the SDGs, which is currently at $4 trillion annually, could increase to 6.4 trillion. So it tells you about misplaced priorities, and to the point about who should have a conscience and what we need to be spending our money on. It really tells you that we need to focus on spending on people rather than on armaments. And just to give you a sense of what I'm referring to, just with $93 billion, which is 4% of military spending, we could end global hunger. And so that then tells you the challenges we're facing. And with 10% of military budgets, we could vaccinate every child worldwide, for example. So this tells you that choices have to be made. It's not a matter of lack of resources. It's where countries choose to focus their attention on.
But is that a lost cause?
I don't think it's a lost cause, because
that arrangement.
It is a sobering moment for us to, and these facts should make us really want to do things differently, and for us to also not feel powerless against the decision makers and who are those who come and make these decisions, including at the UN. The representatives of countries, diplomats from countries, ministers and heads of states from countries. And so it's about how we inform and influence what decisions they come and make, including starting at home.
Minister Anand, do we need Europe to deindustrialize for Africa to industrialize?
Well, I beg to disagree with due respect. As I was saying, that all regions of the world have their own contribution to make. As the countries of the global south bear the burden of hunger and poverty much more, Therefore, those who have the resources and the technologies, not that the countries of the global south don't have, resources are there, new technologies are coming, whether technologies are coming from China, Brazil, Africa, in many areas, India. But it's the transfer. So affirmation, reaffirmation, as was said, it would not be having a real meaning or serving our objectives or the purpose unless and until it's followed by implementable plan of action and a sincerity of commitment. Gentlemen here referred to the climate change. Again on that, what about mitigation? What about the transfer of technologies? We cannot charge money for those technologies. So these are fundamental issues. So Europe has its own contribution. As I mentioned, the world will remain multipolar, irrespective of any claims being made to the contrary. You cannot have imperialism and unipolar world when you have China, when you have European Union, when we have Russia, when we have Brazil, when we have India and many other countries. So each region, what is required is cooperation. What is needed is a consensus to be built, not confrontation. Confrontation eventually has not ever yielded results. Finally, those who have been combatants have been forced to the negotiating table. And that is exactly what's going to happen. We will see need is for a collective pushback to protect whatever we have been able to gain. I'm not quantifying that it is adequate, no. But the countries of the four summits, the four countries of the global south, and the message that has gone, there has to be some resilience on our part, a collective action on our part. I fully agree with Alison that there has to be our own institutional cooperation within Africa, within other regions, and a pushback and to protect. These are not hollow words when we talk of architecture. Yes, it will remain important. What was said is correct. We all know. Today, if 4/5 of the member states of the United Nations pass a resolution, and it remains just on paper, I'm referring to the not one but multiple resolutions. Here we have the representative of the United Nations. I don't have to speak on the SDGs, but let's not forget, it started by the turn of the century with the Heligandum Summit. What were the resources committed then? Even 1% of the GDP of the rich countries would have been adequate at that time, if my memory serves me right. Has that happened? No. We only changed the names from MDGs to SDGs. And I agree that there again. So if we are not alert, if we are not resolute, there's not only the conscience. His conscience is not only on one issue. What happened in Gaza was, yes. But when you look at what's happening in Sudan, what's happened in Congo, when you look at poverty, when you look at rising inequality, so it's the collective conscience has to be connected with all these issues, not an isolated issue. And that's, in my view, it's not that there is any collapse taking place anywhere. We have to prevent a global collapse of this architecture that has been built over decades.
Maybe the reason he was saying that if Europe doesn't progress economically the way it's been progressing, it will be less arrogant. So
Well,
but I
well,
don't want to debate
well,
that.
I think
just wanna,
then the
don't
it
worry,
has to
don't
go
worry,
beyond.
Don't worry. My leader there has indicated that the clock is now working. So what then is going to happen is that I will have my last two panelists to respond both to the questions that they had and then have their closing remarks. In particular, Abla, the question Dominic raised, is there any need or any sense to protect what we don't have instead of using a collective power to develop?
Why are you always asking me those questions? No, but let me say something first, very important. Europe does not need to be weak for Africa to benefit. This is not actually correct. Okay, there is a product cycle. It moves from one country to the other depending on the availability of the resources, the technology, to what extent the technology is available for everybody. The African countries simply need to grab the opportunity. Okay, Europe shouldn't be so arrogant. This is again a very big statement. Okay, I think the problem is more on our side. The bigger problem, okay, is very simply the fact that we have an economic order that is not suitable for what we are now. We have a box, and we are trying to fit in this box an Indian elephant. Okay. All right, it doesn't fit, okay? And that's why the superpowers had the chance to ignore their conscience and ignore the needs of their people and have things calculated differently. This is really the core of the problem. There is no shortage of resources, I agree completely. Actually, the world is extremely rich, but there is a problem in dividing those resources. And they will remain so as long as the voice of the South is weak, okay? And voice of the South is not just a voice. It's voice, reform, empowerment of youth, institutional capacity building, fixing themselves and standing strong to the world. Then they will get the right and things are going to be fixed.
Thank you very much. Werner?
Yeah.
I want you not to respond to Vladislav.
I think I have to. I have to say, first of all, when I mentioned that in history, of course, the culture started with Egypt and the Phoenicians, they certainly were not Europeans, but Egypt is situated in Africa, as I know, the oldest history. And so you could go on. Of course, it is difficult when you go back 3,000 years to be just to everybody and also to mention everybody. But what certainly is a truth is that in the last 500 years, the Europeans did dominate the world. And I'm always sure also that it is necessary to speak out the truth. Okay, and when we do it, we also have to say European industry is in a rather difficult situation now. It is stagnation, but certainly far away from a collapse. I guess that most regions of the world would like to have such an industrial collapse as you mentioned in Europe now. I mean, when you have just 1% of growth, this is not very much. But at the same time, the Americans have a little bit more than 2. And look at China, what the problems are over there, even if they have 5% of growth. Insofar, it's always necessary to be realistic. And I would say, you know, if you ask me what is the most important question from my point of view for Africa? Africa has 17% of the world's population. But only 4% of the trade volume and 2% of the production, the world industrial production volume. Okay, so the most important question is, how can you change these relations? Your big advantage for the future will be that you have 30% of the most important minerals of the world, and that you will have the youngest workforce of the world, and insofar also human capabilities for the future. So far, why don't people not invest? I used to work also before I became a minister 20 years in private industry. And let me tell you, every private man only will invest if he has a fair chance to get his money back. What you need is safety, security, and at the other hand also a calculable situation. Why or what do you need, as far as I see it in Africa, is safety. Are you sure? This is something nobody can bring you from outside. This is what you will have to provide yourself, with a few exceptions. Sudan, this would be, as far as I see it, a task for the community of states, to end the war and not to deliver further armament to any of the parties. Okay, this is one thing. And the other one is education. Of course, you have to prepare your young people. You have the biggest human force. Prepare them in order to overtake jobs. This is the most important thing. If you do it, you will be successful. And I think, and maybe this is the last remark I would like to make. Samir Saran said, it's the principles we have to look at. And I agree absolutely. And I would add one more word. The principles and effective structures in order to execute the principles and to safeguard the principles, because otherwise you will not be able to introduce them. And insofar, I think, that situation for Africa is absolutely not negative. If you look forward, if you look at the workforce, if you look at the talents you do have on the continent, if you give them, if you can provide them a minimum on really good education and also make them ambitious, then you will succeed.
Thank you very much, Werner. The future will not just happen. We must make it happen. We must shape it. I think Africa's time has come to move away from the margins, to sit at the center of global conversation and provide direction. I think our success will be based on our agency, our cooperation, and our connectivity. To my esteemed panelists, thank you very much for this discussion.